hip hop is dead is really that the whole campaign, I call it the movement, you know, really has become mainstream.
Soulja Boy, I know you're young enough to be my kid, but you single-handedly kill hip-hop, man.
Dudes that ain't got no talent is benefiting, you know what I'm saying? So it's just definitely a period where it's been dead. I'm just bold enough to say it.
You got Nas coming back saying hip-hop is dead. Who is he to say hip-hop is dead?
You know who crying? Know them they can't sell no records, man. They crying because they can't sell no records right now. Because Mike Jones got 15 cars, man.
We came all the way from Rockham, okay? We came up...
Man, that. Don't kill hip-hop for real. It's Nas, dog. That's hip-hop. He came out publicly and said hip-hop is dead. And then after that, everybody started saying, hip-hop is dead. Hip-hop was dead. Oh,
But you said, look, the New York City hip-hop died. I didn't shoot it.
No,
you did it.
No,
because
you pulled
nobody
it apart.
else can.
You pulled it apart.
We got to look at what was going on in the South. The South was on the rise, and their culture became popular culture. Popular culture.
In the 50-year history of rap, there's never been a single era that has brought more change to the genre than the 2000s. Where rap was at in the year 2000 versus 2010 is like night and day. From New York gangster rap to Southern-dominated club records and melodies drowning in auto-tune, the 2000s experienced the crunk era, snap era, ringtone era, LimeWire era, the beginning of trap music, and the beginning of auto-tune. It was an extremely polarizing time, dividing new fans and hip-hop veterans and driving old heads into crisis mode. Only 6 years in, Nas declared that hip-hop was dead, and Ice-T blamed Soulja Boy for single-handedly ending it live on the radio. It was a crazy time, so in this video, we'll dive into this controversial decade of rap history.
Find me in the club, bottle full of bub. Mama, I got what you need if you need to feel a buzz.
Going into the 2000s, the legacy of 90s rap was still strong. New York rappers like Jay-Z, DMX, and Ja Rule were running the game. Dr. Dre had recently discovered Eminem, a new extremely lyrical talent, and together they were dominating the charts. Southern influence was also starting to creep into the equation. In the late 90s, New Orleans had been on fire. Cash Money and No Limit broke into the mainstream, with huge records generating nationwide attention. Going into the early 2000s, things wouldn't change drastically. In the years from 2000 to 2003, there was a diverse mix of styles out. New York was still dominant. Jay-Z, still at the top of his career, released Blueprint and the Black Album, two of the best albums of his career, and had several high Billboard charting records. 50 Cent dropped Get Rich or Die Trying, with hit singles In the Club and Many Men, and became one of the most dominant forces ever seen in music. Cameron and Dipset as a collective were on fire and big stars in the world of rap. Fabulous, Jadakiss, and many other New York artists were dropping some of their best music and putting on for the city. However, at the same time, the South's influence was creeping up, and a large reason for this was the success of crunk. Crunk is a subgenre of hip-hop that was created in Memphis in the early 90s. It's characterized by its high energy, call and response chants, and 808s or hard-hitting bass. Its main purpose is for people to mosh to and go crazy in clubs and parties. So energy is everything, but it completely ignores the lyrical aspect of traditional hip-hop. Groups like Lil Jon and the East Side Boys and the Yin Yang Twins were early adopters of crunk in Atlanta and saw more success with the sound than basically any of the originators in Memphis. They brought it to the mainstream, dominating clubs and radio everywhere. Crunk was just one part of what the South had going on in the early 2000s, and there were plenty of artists outside of crunk also seeing success. Ludacris broke onto the scene with his own unique Southern lyrical approach to rap, and Trick Daddy also found mainstream success with the Miami sound. 3 6 Mafia and UGK, two groups who had already achieved legend status in the South during the 90s, began seeing their first glimpses of mainstream success with a record called Sippin' on Some Scissor. This was ironic for 3 6 Mafia because they were one of the groups responsible for pioneering crunk, but while Lil Jon and the East Side Boys were becoming known for the sound, Sippin' on Some Scissor, one of the first mainstream songs to get 3 6 Mafia's name out, wasn't even crunk. Around the same time Sippin' on Some Scissor was blowing up, UGK was featured on the Jay-Z song called Big Pimpin', which was another huge record that helped to introduce them to the mainstream. Outkast, another established group in the South, also began experiencing some mainstream success with albums like Stankonia and Speakerbox and huge records like Miss Jackson, Hey Ya, and So Fresh and So Clean. Nelly, a newcomer in the hip-hop world, exploded onto the scene with his debut album, Country Grammar, seeing Billboard success early on. He repped St. Louis hard, which was technically the Midwest, but much closer to the South than the North in terms of culture. In addition to Nelly, Chingy, a fellow St. Louis rapper, also started taking off with hits of his own in the early 2000s. The whole time, Eminem was growing into a megastar, building his early discography. However, in 2004, he would begin a 5-year hiatus because of problems with substance abuse.
Let me see you bounce right and let you show. Hey, let you show. Just let you show.
The era from 2004 to 2007 is when things would really begin to shift. This time period is also known as the ringtone era because ringtone sales began rising in 2004 and peaked in 2007. During these years, New York's influence began to fall. People have many theories around what caused the fall of New York rap. Some say it was the radio for not distributing airtime to up-and-coming artists. Some believe 50 Cent single-handedly ruined it by beefing with basically every big artist from New York and dividing the city. And some believe that New York's time just ran up, and after 30 years of dominance, it was time for somebody else to have a turn. Regardless of the reason, New York artists began to slip. After 50 Cent blew up in 2003, Ja Rule's career was never the same. 2003 was also the year Jay-Z dropped the Black Album and retired. And when he tried to come back in 2006, it was clear that his influence had declined. Fabulous and Jadakiss saw interest dropping, and after 2004, they both took long hiatuses before releasing more music. Dipset began having problems and would go their separate ways. But Joel Santana was one of the few hot New York artists during this period. After 2005, 50 Cent's dominance began to decline. In 2007, he went head-to-head with Kanye to see who could have the bigger album release and lost. Following this, he would pivot away from rap and into TV. Some attribute his decline with Jimmy Iovine, the head of Interscope, no longer being interested in selling music and more focused on Beats headphones. But regardless of the reason, after this era, 50 was no longer a factor musically. During these same 3 years while New York rap was falling apart, the South was seeing an explosion in popularity. Lil Jon and the East Side Boys, as well as the Yin Yang Twins, continued putting out hits. In addition to crunk, this era also had a new genre behind a lot of its success, and this genre was snap music. Snap music originated in Atlanta. It was similar to crunk, but less intense, more laid back and swagged out, and was typically geared around doing a particular dance. Its name came from the fact that producers replaced the usual snare or clap with a snap instead. The ringtone era was dominated by snap records, crunk records, and combinations of or variations of these two genres. During this period, artists from all over the South were popping up with huge hits using these styles. P.D. Pablo had Freak-a-Leak, Young Jock had It's Going Down, Jaquan had Tipsy, then Franchise Boys had Lean With It, Rock With It, D4L had Laffy Taffy, Young Dro had Shoulder Lean, and there were countless other examples of these types of records during this period. These ringtone and club records were at the top of Billboard, in the clubs, on the radio, and completely dominating rap. In addition to snap and crunk, this was also the period when trap music took off. Similar to crunk, Trap was a genre that took a lot of influence from the OG Memphis sound, as well as Miami and Houston, incorporating things like 808s, double time hi-hats, and claps instead of snares. The word trap originated in Atlanta. It's a term for a place where hustlers cook up and sell their product. Ghetto Mafia were the first rappers to use the term in songs, but T.I. created the term trap music, branded and popularized it. Similar to crunk and snap, trap had energy and you could dance to it, but it was more serious because trap rappers were talking about their life stories hustling, and there was some substance to the music. By the mid-2000s, T.I. and Jeezy were taking trap music to the mainstream, while Gucci Mane was using the sound to dominate the underground. At the same time, Houston was having a moment as well, with artists like Paul Wall, Mike Jones, Slim Thug, and Chamillionaire all reaching the peak of their careers, releasing great music and classic records like Still Tippin' and Sitting Sideways. Down in Florida, T-Pain was just stumbling on something that would change the course of hip-hop forever. He dropped his debut album, Rapper Turned Singer, in 2005, and this was the first time the majority of people had ever heard auto-tune. He had already seen success with The Effect, dropping I'm Sprung, a single that blew up earlier in the year, and over the next couple of years, T-Pain would drop hit after hit and tons of huge features. With his presence all over the radio, the popularity of auto-tune would only grow, and more rappers would begin using the new effect. While T-Pain and all of these other rappers were on the radio and all over Billboard, Lil Wayne was dominating the underground. In 2005, he dropped The Carter 2, and for the next few years, he would develop an insane buzz off mixtapes like his Dedication series, as well as tons of features, preparing to take over the mainstream when he dropped The Carter 3. Near the end of this era, Soulja Boy exploded onto the scene with Crank That, one of the biggest records of the entire decade. His come up was an early example of the power of the internet and showed that all you needed to blow up was a computer, FL Studio, a mic, an internet connection, and you could become a hip-hop sensation without a label, budget, or any of the previous constraints rappers in the past had to deal with. Outside of all the southern artists, 2004 to 2007 was a time period where Kanye cemented himself as a superstar, dropping College Dropout, Late Registration, and Graduation. Lupe Fiasco was also in his prime, releasing Food and Liquor and his hit single, Kick Push. And as previously mentioned, Joel Santana had a lot of excitement around his name. Over on the West Coast, the hyphy movement was in full effect in the Bay Area. Mac Dre had recently passed, but his music was bigger than ever, and older Bay Area legends like E40 and Too Short were seeing a resurgence in their careers. E40 found success on songs like Tell Me When It Go and Snap Your Fingers, and Too Short dropped Blow the Whistle, a massive record and the biggest hit of his career. Down in Southern Cali, Game was seeing a lot of success off his strong debut with the documentary in 2005. Now, this era was extremely controversial. Many view it as a great time, but many viewed it as the death of hip-hop. As previously mentioned, New York lost their hold on the genre, so they were obviously salty about the direction of hip-hop. However, for anyone who cared about lyricism, there was an obvious decline. Crunk music and snap music was completely optimized for people to enjoy at the club and parties or on ringtones. The South did have artists like Ludacris, T.I., and Lil Wayne who put effort into incorporating lyricism into their music, and outside of the South, there were still people like Kanye, Lupe Fiasco, Joel Santana, and Game out and making music, but all of these artists were a small minority of the rappers out at the time. It seemed like the commercial, club, and ringtone music was everywhere, and to an artist like Nas, who dedicated his whole career to lyricism and storytelling and held these elements as the essence of hip-hop, looking at where things had went in the mid-2000s, it felt like the death of the genre he loved, and in 2006, he dropped Hip Hop Is Dead, declaring how he felt to the world. In 2007, Ice-T would say Soulja Boy single-handedly killed it. The opinions of Nas and Ice-T may have been shared by many old heads, But hip-hop was always about the youth, and the youth loved what was going on. Kids were on music sharing sites, pirating their favorite music, and people in their early 20s were having the time of their life, partying and clubbing to all the hot songs, and can still be found in comment sections to this day, reminiscing about this time period.
Mac, I'm gone. A millionaire, I'm a young money millionaire.
From 07 to 09, the genre continued experiencing extreme change. Following 07, the ringtone era died down, and a lot of the artists hot off these types of records began to fall off. The artists with real talent continued rolling, and through the late 2000s, T.I., Lil Wayne, and T-Pain continued dominating the Billboard charts. Soulja Boy also continued to stay relevant, dropping several other hits that kept him all over the radio and on Billboard. And Eminem returned from his hiatus, picking back up where he left off. This late 2000s era was really an experimental time that would shape the future of music. T-Pain introduced autotune in 05, but in the late 2000s, some of the biggest rappers really began trying to master the effect and make it a part of their style, and this led to things becoming more melodic. In 2008, Kanye dropped 808s and Heartbreak, experimenting heavily with autotune and a new melodic style. This same year, he signed Kid Cudi, who was also an early adopter of this new melodic wave. Lil Wayne also embraced autotune early on, experimenting with it on his song Lollipop, which would become one of the biggest hits of his career, and after 2008, he would use it constantly. With the scene shifting, this was the perfect time for a new artist to slip in the game, combining rapping and melodies, and this is exactly what Drake did, dropping his So Far Gone project in 2009, perfectly blending melodies and rap, breaking onto the scene with hits like Best I Ever Had and Houston, Atlanta, Vegas. Drake didn't really use autotune that much, but he would play a huge part in the process of popularizing slower melodic records, blending R&B and rap. Melodies have been present in rap for a while, and Nelly made his name mixing rapping and singing, but he was on more up-tempo production, and it was a different vibe than where the sound was evolving to in the late 2000s. Like all change in anything, there were people on both sides, and while many artists were embracing melodies and autotune, some didn't like it. Unsurprisingly, it was the older artists in the genre. In summer of 2009, Jay-Z released Death of Autotune, criticizing hip-hop as a whole for getting softer, singing, and using autotune too much. He even criticized the changing fashion. The record had all the signs of someone used to something they loved being a certain way and fighting change. But change was inevitable, and autotune, as well as melodic rap, was just getting started. In the following years, it would become almost standard for the majority of rappers. In an upcoming video, we'll be taking a look at these following years, the early 10s and the rise of melodic rap, cloud rap, drill, the revival of lyricism, as well as the early careers of artists like Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, Wiz Khalifa, Mac Miller, Chief Keef, Future, Lil B, and many more. From 2000 to 2009, a drastic amount of change happened. Rap went from New York dominated and oriented around bars to being controlled by the South and oriented around the sound and feel of the music, with bars being an afterthought. This decade really polarized hip-hop fans, completely alienating hip-hop purists, but despite claims that the genre was over, hip-hop remains stronger than ever, and lyricism would even make a mainstream comeback, with artists like Kendrick, Cole, and Drake seeing huge success with lyricism, storytelling, and all the elements of traditional hip-hop. So how applicable are the 2000s to where current hip-hop is right now? You could easily draw comparisons between the ringtone era and the current TikTok era, because the concept of artists making catchy and repetitive songs for the intended audience is the same for both. The difference is TikTok virality moves 1,000,000 times faster. There were much fewer popular ringtone era songs, and a song that blew up in the ringtone era guaranteed the artist's name would be hot for months and months after it blew. Even after the initial popularity of the song died down, people would still remember the record, and there are ringtone hits that will still get a strong reaction from an older crowd in the current day. The volume of popular TikTok songs is way higher, and they last a significantly shorter time. And oftentimes, people can't even put a name to the song. Another comparison to this era is older hip-hop fans saying hip-hop is dead, the way Nas and Ice-T did in 2006 and 2007. The main difference between now and then is the youth. In 2006, the youth were still obsessed with rap. They were all doing the Soulja Boy dance. They were on LimeWire all day looking for their favorite records and tuning in to BET to watch all the Rap City freestyles. Rappers like Lil Wayne and Kanye West had massive followings, and kids who basically worshiped them, closely following their music, copying the way they dressed, talked, and everything about them. In the current day, kids aren't showing the same level of interest. Artists like Playboi Carti and NBA Youngboy have managed to grow cult followings, but these are outliers. These days, the majority of kids and teenagers don't even have a favorite artist. They just listen to whoever's hot at the time. The reaction to the XXL freshman cover is typically a decent measure of the popularity of the current class of rappers. In response, the last couple of years has been lower than ever. Hip-hop was able to grow past the mid-2000s era, dominated by lower quality microwave music, because of two reasons. The youth fully embracing everything going on in hip-hop, keeping the popularity of the genre high, and rappers like Lil Wayne, Kanye, T.I., and Jeezy being major stars, but still caring about the longevity of the music they were creating and serving as quality control for the genre. In the current generation, it's debatable on whether there are enough big artists serving as quality control for the genre, but the youth definitely don't seem to be maintaining hip-hop's popularity. So it will be interesting to see how things play out in the future.